So today's lecture is going to be about assessing the impact. We stopped 2 days ago after the screening and the scoping exercise. So I hope that you had time to build a team for your environmental impact project, and that we can now start looking into how you can assess the environmental impact. That's today's objective. We'll look at 2 examples, and we'll look into different tools how to assess the impact. So again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to paste it into the chat. I will try to look into it from time to time. It's simply easier for me if you, point out specific topics that you're especially interested, and then we can discuss it more in detail. So I think, so you all know that this is the environmental impact assessment course. I received a few questions regarding the exercises. I would like to go over it, over the questions I've received by email. One important thing are the references that you're going to use within your final report of the environmental impact statement. It's important to use scientific references. So ideally, of course, you would reference peer-reviewed articles. Peer-reviewed articles are articles that are published in scientific journals, and you can find them on the Web of Knowledge in the link just listed here. I can put this into the chat. I just have to click on it and then put it into it. And but the Web of Knowledge is accessible from Iceland, from anywhere. I think if you're not in Iceland, you might need a special permit, but you could connect to the Reykjavik University network, and then you should be able to sign into the Web of Knowledge. 1 second. Now I got lost within the computer here. 1 second. So Google Scholar, Google Scholar, typically there all kinds of references are in there as well. The difference between the Web of Knowledge and Google Scholar is that in Google Scholar you can upload anything. You can upload your master thesis. You can upload the report from this class if you want, and make it available for the entire world, and make it accessible through Google Scholar. So if you reference articles from the Web of Knowledge, you just simply have a higher quality. And of course, not everything is in the Web of Knowledge. So if you find a report from a company, then that is also, of course, acceptable. And some information you will only find it from companies, but then it's important that you still reference it in a correct way. And if the report comes from a company and that they don't list a specific author, then it's important that you name the name of the company in the text and the year, and in the final references at the end, then you put in again the name of the company, the year, the title of the report, and then some kind of a report number or a referencing of the report, and then the city and the country of the company. In some cases, it might be very evident. For example, if you were to reference CERN, the organization CERN, which is located in Geneva, then in Switzerland, of course, maybe this is a company or an organization that is well known, but you still need to reference the city and the country simply because it has to be consistent. If you give the city and the country for one reference, you have to give it for all of them. And then, of course, if you have a company that is maybe not known in Iceland, for example, a geothermal company in Indonesia or so, then it's important that you give the city and the country so that a reader from Iceland can understand, oh, this is a company located in a specific city in another country. I just want to point out, you have also here the link to the referencing style. I'm going to share this very quickly. So the referencing style I would like you to adhere is the AGU referencing style, which is the American Geoscience Union referencing style. And in principle, in the text that you write, you can have in parentheses the last name, as you can see right here, and the year. If you only have one author, if you have two authors, then you would have to list both authors and the year. And if you have more than two authors, then you can put a et al. For example, like here. In the text, if you have more than two authors, then you can simply put the first author, the last name of the first author, and the year. And then in the referencing style, you would have something like this. Similarly as explained, you have the authors, the last name of the author, then the abbreviation or the first letter of the first names, second author, third author, and so on. Then you have the year, the title of the article, and then the title of the journal. And then the volume, the issue, the pages, and the DOI, digital object identifier. That's really important that you adhere to this referencing style, because then your report becomes, it gets the credibility, because then the references are correct and it's easy to find from where you got the information from. So you will have a chance you will get a feedback from your abstracts that you hand in, because there you will have to do the referencing in the correct style. If there are any questions, please ask now so that we can discuss it right now, or regarding the exercise, the abstract, or also other questions regarding referencing, because that's a really important aspect of your work, because it shows where you got the information from. One thing I also wanted to show you, because the questions came up, I simply have to share the other screen. One moment, please. And so I go back here, and then I have to go in here, share the other screen. So here, one question came up: if in the individual assignments or also in the final report, if you can use figures that have been published in other reports. And the short question is yes, and the long question is yes, but you need to provide a caption for the figure. Like in this particular case, this figure was taken from a PhD thesis, and the caption of the figure was cropped out, and there was a new caption added, including a reference to the original figure. And in the text, you need to have a parenthesis where you reference the figure. For example, here in the text, you see example figure 1, and then you have here figure 1, and then you have the figure itself comes from a different reference, but you still provide a caption that fits to your report. Same thing for tables. Here, this table was taken from a reference, from another reference, from a PhD thesis, and then the title was cropped out of the table, but the table a title was provided so that it fits to the text. So, short question: you can use figures and tables from other sources, but you need to indicate where you got it from, and you need to provide and a caption that fits to your report. Any questions, more questions regarding referencing, regarding the exercises? I think if there are no questions, then we just continue. Do I see? No, there are no questions. Okay, so those 3 links are very useful, or those 4 links are very useful if you want to do. Oh, Zotero, I didn't mention this. Zotero is a software, a referencing software. You can download it. It's freeware. It's supported by Reykjavik University, and you can download it. And in this way, you can link it to the Web of Knowledge. You can download the references from the Web of Knowledge, and then select AGU referencing style, and your references will be in the perfect will be in the correct referencing style, so you don't have to worry about the styling, the referencing styling. Of course, if you have a reference that is not in the Web of Knowledge, you would have to enter it manually into Zotero, and then you have to be careful that you put the correct information into the correct place so that the software can reference your reference in the correct way. So these 4 links are really useful. I recommend that you start getting to know this, because this will, at least if you stay in the academic world, then you will use those 3 links or those 4 links over and over again. And referencing is simply, your work will fail and lead to success with the correct referencing. So referencing is really important. A few more words to tomorrow. Tomorrow, I expect you to present your project, to present your team. So everybody should be in a team, and everybody, and tomorrow I expect you to provide a short PowerPoint presentation where you just explain what your project is about, what your team is, and how you're going to divide up your project into sub-chapters, because everybody will have to work on the sub-chapter of a subtopic of your project and come up with an inventory. The inventory, that's what we discussed 2 days ago, is where you provide all the information that is needed, that came out of your scoping and your screening exercise, where you identified what is relevant and what not. Because based on the inventory, you can then go in, synthesize the results, and identify the impacts, which is then kind of the result section of your project. So again, I want to emphasize this. I showed this figure already 2 days ago, but this is more or less the structure of your final report. And it's a very scientific or academic structure. You have a title, you have an abstract, you have an introduction where you introduce the topic, then you have a system boundary, and then you explain the methods. The methods within the 3 weeks you have are usually going to be literature research. Maybe you're going to do some surveys to identify how strong is the impact perceived by the class. Or for example, or what is the social acceptance of a new policy? For example, a few years ago, a group of students looked at the acceptance of coming to bicycle to Reykjavik University, and they made a survey and asked students how they perceived the incentive to come by bicycle to the university, and what is needed to convince them to come by bicycle. Should there be a shelter to put the bicycle inside? Should there be showers and possibilities to change when you arrive at the Reykjavik University, and so on? So surveys can be a method that you can use within the 3 weeks, because it's still something that you can do. It's probably going to be difficult to do measurements, real measurements of environmental impact, simply because in the 3 weeks we're a bit limited. And also this year specifically, because of the COVID situation, we cannot go outside and we cannot meet physically, so we cannot do any physical measurements. Unfortunately, we also had to cancel the activity outside where we usually measured water quality, air quality, and noise pollution outside. But yeah, then of course, once you have the results, or once you described your methods, then you list the results without much interpretation. And then you can have a discussion where you interpret your results and you say, look, the impacts look like this, but the social benefits might prevail, and discuss your results and put your results in context. It's important to separate results and discussion, because then you can have then you are objective in the results. You simply provide the results, and in the discussion you can become more subjective or discuss why you think environmental impacts are acceptable or not regarding your plan. In some cases, especially if you have like big power plants, then you might have a disaster plan, a litigation measurements, a subchapter on this. So again, it depends a bit on you, on the topic that you select, how much emphasis you put on each of the chapters. Finally, maybe a monitoring in there, and then a conclusion, and of course the references are important within the final report. So I put in this figure because this is usually how I start when I start with a new article. I simply sit down with a white piece of paper and start drawing up my ideas, and because this allows me then to structure my ideas, which might still be a bit confusing, and then come up with something that looks more like this, that looks to this academic structure by simply rearranging the small figures that I wrote. I usually start out by, actually, this is a good example. This is a PhD project of a former colleague. And what she did, she came up with this first sketch of 10 figures she wanted to include in her first paper for her PhD project. And as you can see here, it was hardly understandable what the figure meant, but she had clearly in mind what she wanted to express with each figure. And this allowed us to discuss how the structure should look of the final paper. So so my point is that maybe it's good to start out simply by putting down the ideas in a very simple way, and then start discussing how you want to structure it. It's really important that you do this together, because at the end, in the first 2 weeks, you might work individually on the fact sheet. And then in the third week, the challenge will be to come together and merge the different fact sheets together in one final report. It's part of the challenge of this course to work as individuals on subtasks and then come together and combine the results from the individual subchapters into one final report. Of course, it's important that you already interact while you work on the inventory of a subchapter of your environmental impact statement, because at the end it has to fit. So it's important that you discuss already during the phase where you work on your fact sheet, that at the end it will be easier to combine the different subchapters into one final report. So these were just tips to give you give you tips how to proceed with the exercises and also what is expected tomorrow. So since I don't see any questions, I'm going to jump right into the first part of this morning lecture, which is actually the slides from before yesterday. I have to bring them back because it's the tools, how to identify the impacts of environmental impact assessment. So at this stage, again, like I mentioned before, you should have already discussed the scoping and the screening and the scoping exercise. So you know already more or less what your project, well, you know what your project is, and you know already more or less what the main environmental impacts should be. And of course, now to identify the impacts, the most easiest or the most evident way of identifying the impacts is simply by looking if your project complies with the regulations, with the legislation, if you fulfill the legal requirements. That is a very, at least from a discussion point of view, a very easy exercise, because either you comply with the regulation or not. It's more or less a yes or no discussion if your project is within the regulations. But keep in mind, an environmental impact statement is always also a statement that you provide to the public to convince the public that your project is has some environmental impacts, but those environmental impacts are acceptable in regard what the project gives back to the society. It can also be, you can also have positive environmental impacts, which would even be better, so that you get even more support from the general public. So keep in mind that you write the environmental impact statement in principle. Of course, there's legislation and you have to do it, but you also write it for the general public because you want to convince the general public that your project is a sustainable project and does good for the society and should be supported. If you try to sneak around challenging aspects of the environmental impact, then the public might, of course, during the iteration with the public might exactly point to those points, and then you might run into a long process of trying to convince the public of the sustainability of your project. So here's a long list of what you want to do. You want to try to distinguish between positive and negative, long and short term, and reversible and non-reversible impacts, cumulative impact. Sometimes one impact leads to another one, which accumulate over time. So you want to point this out, distinguish between significant and insignificant impacts, look at alternatives. We already mentioned this a little bit yesterday. Sorry, my headphone fell out, so I have to replace my headphone. And then maybe take the carrying capacity into account, and yeah, try to be unbiased and consistent, and provide all the information, of course, and synthesize the results in a way that it's convincing for the public. And the synthesizing of the result is actually a really important exercise. This is also why your report for this class is limited to 40 pages, so that you try to put the information in a concise and a way, bring it across to the reader. That is really also an important aspect of an environmental impact assessment. There is no, in the legislation, as we have seen 2 days ago, there's no real statement that you need to do a life cycle analysis or that you need to do a cost-benefit analysis. But those tools are important tools to convince the public. If you do a life cycle analysis of a product, you might show that your product is more sustainable than another product which provides the same service. For example, if you look at electric cars and conventional combustion engines, then you can do a life cycle analysis, look at the impacts that are created by the extraction of the lithium and by the production of the batteries and by the recycling of the batteries, and then you compare it with the impacts that are created by through the extraction of the petroleum, through the transport of the petroleum, through the driving of fossil fuel cars, and there an LCA, a life cycle analysis, can be very convincing to embed it into your environmental impact statement. So long story, this was more or less the summary of today's lecture, and now I just want to point out some of the tools that can lead to a very convincing environmental impact statement where you, and I will just discuss some of the tools. I'm not going to go into the details of the tools, I just want to point them out. We had this already 2 days ago, the life cycle framework. That is where you're going from the very beginning, from the extraction of the raw resources, from the resources that you need for your project. Then you have your project and you have your outputs. Within the life cycle, you can of course have a system boundary. We discussed this also already. But if you want to have a full life cycle analysis, then you would of course include the very beginning of the project until the very end. Cradle to grave is called, would this be called, when you go all the way from the extraction of the raw resources to the recycling of the resources after the operation of your project. This is typically what is a life cycle assessment, what a life cycle assessment is all about. So obviously this seems like a lot of work, and it is also a lot of work, but the main work comes from your fact sheets. In your fact sheets that you have already established within the individual exercise, you will have in there how much energy is needed, how much steel is needed, how much resources are needed, how much labor is needed for your project. And then you can go into what is called life cycle analysis databases. The most prominent probably is the eco-invent. And there you can select, if you, for example, your project requires 100 kilometers of pipelines because you want to transport geothermal brine from a wellhead to a geothermal power plant, then you can assess what material your pipelines are made of, and you can go to this eco-invent database and extract out of the database the environmental impacts needed to produce the steel or the raw material to produce your pipeline. So these databases, they become bigger and bigger. There's more and more information in there, and so it's a powerful tool to make life cycle analysis assessments easier. And I'm not going to go into detail because we will have one morning lecture on life cycle analysis next week, next Monday. Also from Hellisheiði power plant, we will look at the life cycle analysis of the Hellisheiði power plant and some other examples from Iceland. But if you're interested, feel free to watch this YouTube video. It's about 3 minutes, 39 seconds long, where the Gabi software is explained, how Gabi can be connected to eco-invent, and how you can prove with a life cycle analysis that your product has perhaps less impact than another product, and at least you can show the environment in a comprehensive and holistic way the impacts of your product. LCAs do not only cover carbon emissions, they also cover the entire environmental impact from ocean acidification, from eutrophication, from resources resources use. So there are various different aspects that you can extract from an LCA data analysis, life cycle analysis. What I also want to point out, since beginning next year, we will have a collaboration with the Johannes Kepler University in Linz in Austria. So there's the possibility to do an Erasmus exchange for those students who are enrolled in Reykjavik University who are not doing an exchange. And there's a LCA group where you can work together with our Austrian friends on life cycle analysis projects and maybe do an internship or an Erasmus exchange year in Linz if you're interested in getting more information and working with people that have been working with life cycle analysis for longer periods. So if you're interested in this, please contact the international office. This could, could be another option. What I also want to point out, this eco-invent is a company. It's located in Switzerland. And in principle, every time that you write a life cycle analysis, you can apply and send it into eco-invent, and they might incorporate your new study into the eco-invent database. But for this, of course, you have to go through a peer review process where your study will be cross-checked by other experts. And if you meet the quality standards, then your product, your LCA, might be included into the eco-invent database. And in this way, the eco-invent database becomes bigger and bigger with every project that is made. So this was the eco-invent database. So to come back to the book, one very simple method of describing the environmental impacts, those are simple matrices, where you simply describe the impact on different sectors or on different spheres of your project. So you can, for example, have a matrix like this where you have soil and geology, flora, fauna, air quality, and then you have a simple check if if your project is going to impact it or not. Obviously, this is a very simple way of describing the impact, and you will have to have a very convincing text accompanying this table in order to convince the reader that your environmental impact assessment is sufficient with a table like this. And I would encourage you to go a step further rather than these simple matrices, but these simple matrices are a good way maybe to give a first overview of the impacts that you have identified based on the fact sheets that you have collected so far. A good method of identifying the impacts is do interviews with experts. So you go and talk with experts. Yesterday I saw that Einar asked you the question, what do you think are the main impacts of geothermal power? And then you had, I think the emission was the biggest impact, sulfur emissions and CO2 emissions into the atmosphere were perceived as being a very important impact. And then there are other impacts like landscape and so on. So one way of scaling the importance of different impacts is simply by doing interviews and then trying to give it a quantitative value to each of the impacts and saying, okay, 80% of the people surveyed say that sulfur emissions are the main concern regarding the environmental impacts of a geothermal power plant. And then you would, of course, give the emissions of sulfur a rather high impact than, for example, maybe visual impacts of the power plant that might impact on the landscape in the area. So checklists for interviews are important. So you would have to, of course, before you start an interview, think about what you want to get out of the interview and how can you, after the interview, come up with something which helps you to weigh the different impacts that you have identified in the first table, like we've just seen before. So you want to prepare your questions that at the end you have a way of arguing why you weigh certain impacts stronger than other ones. And if you list this out in the report, then your report becomes very objective, because you can simply say, look, based on this survey, we say that this is the most important impact of this project. So I have to go to the next slide. Okay, framework for analyzing sub-elements. Obviously, if you look at the different sectors, the different spheres, like water quality, surface water, and you can have a table like this, where you identify the sub-elements also, and then you have objectives of regarding water quality. I think this was also a question that came yesterday up. If the geothermal power plant has an impact on the water quality, and then you want to have an objective in there. You want to protect, of course, the drinking water. In Heidmark, just upstream of Heidmark is the drinking water reserve of Reykjavik. So you want to protect that area, and you want to already in the results identify how subsequent or regarding your environmental impact assessment project. So a table like this, where you have sub-elements, where you identify already subsequent impacts and methods to mitigate the objectives, can be quite helpful to identify. At the end, I think what is important is to come up with a matrix like this, where you have, again, similar as before, the impacts, but this time you give it a weighted impact. It's called a magnitude matrix, where you simply identify if an impact is large or less large, And this is the exactly same table as before, but here you have a coloring code where you identify if the impact is significant or not. And this is a bit what I'm going to be looking for in your report. If you can somehow come up with a weighted matrix. What you can also do, if you want to go more into detail and become more mathematical, you can try to give each individual impact that you identify regarding, so in this particular case, you have 3 sectors: human interests, aesthetics, environmental pollution, and ecology. So if you had a project that would fit those criteria, you could have a fact sheet about each of those 4 subchapters, and then you could create a weighted value for each of the sub-elements for each of the chapters. So for example, ecology, you could go in and look at the terrestrial ecology, the aquatic ecology, and then give each individual factor a weighted value. And this typically could be done through interviews with biologists, with environmental agencies, or with experts in the area. The same thing with environmental pollution, same thing with aesthetics. How does the project going to impact on the landscape? And the same thing with human interests. So the main point of this slide is simply that you can use the framework for sub-analyzing sub-elements, and then, oops, so the figure doesn't appear anymore, doesn't matter, and then give each sub-element a weighted value in order to come up with something that is a weighted and magnitude matrix. So again, here, on the top right-hand page is always the page of the book where the matrices are explained in more detail. So, but here's another weighted matrix where you multiply the magnitude times the importance, and where you get a weighted matrix where you can then somehow come up with a total impact regarding different environmental impacts. It's another way, as long as you clearly explain in the methods how you did your weighted and magnitude matrix and how you came up with those, with the weighing and the magnitude, it's all acceptable. There's in principle, there is no one way of doing it, because at the end, again, you will have to convince the reader that the way you came up with the total impact was the best possible, or is a good way and is a subjective way of identifying the impact. In this way also, concerned citizens, if they're going to read your report, they can say in and say, look, this 3 is far too low. You talked to the wrong expert. Please go back and reassess the magnitude of air quality of your project, because this value that you gave for the magnitude here is in our opinion far too low. And if you talk with these and these experts, the value would be higher. And then in a real life project, you will probably have to go back and redo your assessment and maybe come up with a slightly higher magnitude, which would increase then the impact regarding air quality. But by writing it out in a concise and clear way in your environmental impact statement, it becomes easy to go back and adjust those figures that you might have underestimated or overestimated, and then come up with a readjusted environmental impact statement that takes into account the concerns of specific citizens. At the end, you will. It's the general public that you want to convince. Of course, you want to convince also the the governmental agency, but the governmental agency is in principle simply doing the work for the general public to assess if you have adequately addressed the environmental impacts within your statement. Threshold of concern matrices. We discussed this also 2 days ago a little bit, the advantages and disadvantages of threshold matrices. In threshold matrices, you simply go in, say, is a certain threshold reached or not? And then it's yes or no. So, so as we discussed, this is a very simple way of addressing the environmental impacts, but it leaves little space for common sense. It might not always be applicable, and you might sometimes come up with a conclusion that simply doesn't make sense for your project. Like the example that we discussed 2 days ago with de-icing with salt next to the ocean. Of course, the salt flows into the ocean. There's the impact is minimum. There is no impact because it simply goes back to the ocean. But if you do this next to a freshwater lake where the aquatic fauna will be impacted by the salt that is being spilled into the freshwater, then you might have quite a high impact. So there a threshold would clearly not be very practical to apply for both cases. So just to point out the advantages or disadvantages of threshold of concern matrix in your final report. Leopold matrix is in principle a weighted and magnitude matrix where you have predefined criteria that you're going to look at and where you can identify a magnitude and a importance of an impact and then list it out. So this is very well explained in the original publication of Leopold et al. It's used mostly in North America, especially in the United States. And it has also been used by various students in previous years. For example, a group of students looked at used the Leopold matrix to assess the environmental impacts of wellheads in a geothermal power project in Kenya. And they simply created surveys and asked the class how do they perceive certain impacts regarding groundwater, geothermal reservoir, land, erosion, air, greenhouses, and then came up with the Leopold matrix, which is in principle a magnitude matrix, and came up with the final impact where they could then identify, first of all, the total impact, and then also identify critical areas that are especially of concern to the general public. Of course, they use the class as general public, but this is a way within the 3-week course how we could mimic the interaction with the public. So here already this visualizes a bit the value of such a Leopold matrix, because here you can already see that the wellhead operation and the geothermal reservoir is a big concern, the use up of the geothermal reservoir. So of course now you would have to go in and read in the report what is exactly meant by this and how do they explain this high value. But the table itself gives already a visual identification of the main impact. You can also go in, maybe noise is a big impact from the wellhead. So you can already see here that and maybe also the re-injection of the brine into the geothermal reservoir is also of main concern. So you can already see the 3 main concerns regarding their analysis. And of course, now you could think about it. How about emissions into the atmosphere? And then you can look at air and they see, okay, they have also some identified some impacts regarding air emissions. And but my point is that with a Leopold matrix, you can, in a simple way, visualize the main impacts and identify the main impacts and main concerns of the population or of the people surveyed within your project. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, then I will just continue. So this was another project. So this was another project where a group of students used the Leopold matrix to identify the cleanup of the Great Pacific garbage patch like we discussed at the beginning of the course. There's a lot of plastic accumulating in the Pacific. and they looked into how many boats are needed in order to drive out there, collect all the garbage, bring it to the land, and put it into landfills, and how much emissions are created. And then they created a Leopold matrix and weighted the impacts on the emissions and on the biology and on various different aspects, and came up with a report like this. And finally, based on their Leopold matrix, they could convincingly argue that the cleanup would create more pollution, at least if you go out there with fossil-driven ships, than if you just leave the garbage in there. And unfortunately, they came up with this conclusion that it's almost impossible to clean up this garbage patch with conventional boats by simply driving out there and collecting the garbage. Yeah, so time-dependent matrices. So in some cases, your project is going to go over many years, many decades maybe. So then it would be valuable to have a time-dependent matrix, because the environmental impact might change over the years. It might get less or it might get more. So you want to point this out as well, in case something lasts, your project goes over many years, that you take this into account, that the impact changes over different years. Parameter functions. This is, of course, it's not always a black-white or determined factor how the environmental impact is. Two examples I want to give here is, for example, dissolved oxygen in a stream. If you have a stream going down a river, so this is especially interesting for example, if you were to build a hydropower plant. And at the surface, the water is always saturated with oxygen. So typically, 10 degrees water has maybe 10 milligrams of water at the surface. But if you extract the water at a lower point in the reservoir, the concentration of oxygen might be lower. And the critical point is about 4 milligrams of oxygen per water. And if you let water that has been oxygenated into a stream downstream, into a river downstream, then you might create conditions where the oxygen concentration is too low, and this might then lead to fish kills, like we've also seen in the first day of the lecture, that if you decrease the oxygen too far, then this can lead to severe impacts on the fish. But as you can see here, this is just a figure taken from a textbook, and there is no clear threshold that you cannot really say that 4 milligram all the fish will die, because it's a continuous, gradual impact that is created. So it's very difficult to say, look, at 4 milligrams we have to stop. So you might include a figure like this simply to show that the impact is not linear, but that it's a complex interaction between the impact and the effects on the environment. Similar can be said about the abundance of deer. So, I mean, for hunters sometimes use this argument to say, okay, we have to hunt the deers because they graze away all the grass and have an impact themselves on the nature. And then, of course, you can say if you yeah, so here in this figure, you have the percentage of carrying capacity based on animal units, and then the environmental quality. So of course, if you take out some of the deers, the environmental quality might increase because you have more grass growing. But if you take out too many deers, you might lose the species, and then the environmental quality might decrease again because simply you have killed off all the deers, and then your land has a lower environmental quality because you simply have lost one species in the area. And so again, it's not always a linear system, and you might point this out in specifically for more complex interaction between impacts and effects on the environment. There's no question, so I'm just going to continue. So next thing that you can use is models. Models are powerful tools, numerical models. We also looked at this, the IPAD equation. I think we mentioned it already, but the IPAD equation was probably one of the very first environmental models developed. It's in principle simply the multiplication of the population times the affluence times the technology, which can estimate the impact of a society on the environment. I don't want to go into detail too much about this. If you're interested how they actually came up with the exact formulation, you can read their publications developed in the 1970s. But nowadays you have a lot more sophisticated models, and they can range from air dispersion models. Here an example from a project I have been working on myself in the United States, where we looked at a phosphorus plant close to Pocatello, and where we simulated the emissions from the phosphorus plant into residential areas under specific meteorological conditions. And the reason why you want to do simulations is because you want to simulate the worst case. So if you have a factory that you built in a close to a residential area, you want to try to predict what can happen if the wind blows all the emissions directly into the residential areas. And you can use a numerical model to estimate the pollution impacts and then include this in your environmental impact statement by stating, look, we're going to build this factory, but we looked at the worst case. Even if the wind blows and you have inversion and all the pollution is being kept to the ground, if you have temperature inversion, the impact on residential areas is still below or at an acceptable level. So modeling can be a very powerful tool to predict impacts and to assess worst case scenarios for your project. Like you have seen already here in the example below here, the overlaying of maps. So ArcGIS is important because then you can overlay different maps and identify if your impact might impact on ecological sensitive side, on historic sites, on visual sites, or on settlements, or on water. So ArcGIS is also a powerful tool where you can simply look at the use of the space and identify how your project is going to impact the area, and visualize how spatially the impacts are going to be distributed around your project. Okay, so then we come into, so the modeling is more like a numerical engineering based exercise, and then we have these what is called the causal chains, and this goes a little bit into social science. So you assess how different stakeholders interact with each other. In the book, the example of a causal chain of a bus corridor is described. So, for example, if Reykjavik City would build a new bus line from downtown to Breitholt or to some of the suburbs, then you could look into with causal chains, with a causal chain analysis, how the new bus line will impact on the society and on different aspects of the environment, and also maybe also on the economy. So this really goes into social science, but what I want to point out, so we worked on two examples where we looked at causal mapping of the stakeholders' perceptions, and those were two power plants we looked at. One was Hvammsvirkjun in southern Iceland, and the other one was Valdambra, a project in Switzerland. Both are two hydropower plants that were proposed to be built in ecological sensitive areas. And what we did in order to assess the perception of the stakeholders and in order to see where are conflicting interests and what are people concerned about and how does the project impact on the society, on the neighbors, and on the environment, we simply, what we did is a casual mapping. So a little bit similar as described in the book for the bus lane. We did it for two hydropower projects, and we did interviews with all relevant stakeholders. So of course, the developers, the power companies, we talked to them. We talked to the municipalities. We talked to the politicians that would like to have renewable energy and shift away from dirty energies towards hydropower, which is by itself a rather clean energy source. But we also talk to environmental groups like NGOs, nature conservation groups, hunter groups, fishery groups that had strong concerns regarding those two projects. I don't want to go into too much into the results of the study, but what we did, we then digitalized all the answers of all stakeholders, put them in a computer program, and then identified positive and negative feedbacks. So this is what comes out of a stakeholder analysis. In principle, it's a very similar project as here, as we saw before, for the bus lanes, simply based on the answers of the stakeholders regarding a hydropower plant. We could identify the main causes of concerns regarding those two hydropower projects, and we actually were able to identify that the main concerns are different in Switzerland and in Iceland. In Iceland, one of the big concerns was that the Throssau River has already been so much dammed, and that an additional dam would simply be not acceptable for some groups, because they have been fighting for so many years against hydropower that they simply are against any other hydropower plant on that particular river. They were also concerned about specific impacts, like an island that is going to be drowned, and like fish migration, that the salmon and trout fishing would be impacted too severely. And in Switzerland, was mainly a concern if it's also economically viable, this project. There was also concern regarding the fishery, also concerns regarding the wilderness, that there's going to be too much traffic going up there. So we could identify those specific aspects. And then of course, this would allow you to come up with compensation measurements, mitigation measurements to address specifically those aspects, rather than having a discussion where you don't really understand why people are blocking each other. You can then address specific aspects more in detail and try to see if you can find a consensus regarding your project by providing mitigation measurements or compensation measurements, or simply changing your project so that that certain aspects are not targeted within the stakeholder analysis. Based on such stakeholder analysis, you can also come up with a cumulative impact perturbation impact model. So here in the book, this is very nicely explained. And you have the cause tourism, then you have a perturbation, and then have a primary impact and the secondary impact. So in the case of the two hydropower plants that I showed before, based on the stakeholder analysis, we can identify what are the primary impacts. Could be fishery. Then there are secondary impacts that some people would, that for some people it's important to have local fish because it's a specialty from that particular area. It has also a very personal value to them. And we can then assess the secondary well, the primary impacts and secondary impacts, which could be, for example, that local restaurants have a specific interest in having fish from that particular river because it's a specialty in the area, and then identify primary impacts and secondary impacts based on such a casual mapping exercise. If there are any questions or comments, feel free. I don't see any comments, so I'm just going to continue. At the end, what also can be very helpful if you create a decision tree. Here again, an example from a figure from the book, where you simply have a decision tree in case of problems of groundwater contamination. So this would be a mitigation measurements in case of the unexpected. So you would have to have a clear line of decisions how to deal in case of an emergency. A figure like this could be something very valuable in your environmental impact statement, especially if you have a big project that might create some environmental disasters. So you could have a emergency plan based on a decision tree like presented here. I'm going to go right on two more subchapters. These are very short subchapters: mitigation and participation. Participation is important, or mitigation measurements, of course, like I mentioned already before. Once you have identified the impact, you did your LCA, you did your magnitude matrix, and you provided a casual mapping of the case. Then you can go in, identify the main impacts. So you have identified the main impacts, and then you can say, okay, we're going to do additional mitigation measurements to make our project more sustainable. So in the case, for example, of the hydropower plant, you could go in and say, okay, we're going to create fish ladders so that the fish can migrate upstream and go around the hydropower plant. In the case of an electric car, you could say, okay, the lithium extraction will be produced in a sustainable way. We will make sure that that this company that is producing the lithium for the electric batteries does it in a socially acceptable and sustainable way, and so on. So you can list mitigations of the possible impacts within a table, just to show that you also try to mitigate the possible impacts from your project. Here's an example of a mitigation measurement. So anyone recognize this town? So this is a small town in Switzerland, close to the city of Lucerne. And as you can see here, there's a line in the middle of the town, and this was a highway that was constructed in the middle of the town. And when the first plans came up with this highway, the citizens were concerned that this highway is going to completely destroy our village because it will cut our village in two parts. And one of the mitigation measurements was then to actually build a bridge over the highway, or make a half tunnel over to lower the highway and create almost a tunnel out of the highway, so that so that it's very easy to cross over. It's also easy for animals to cross over over the highway, so that the village is not completely cut in two, which would be a typical mitigation measure to reduce the impact of a highway. And actually this is being done across whole Europe. Every time a highway is being built, within the European directive, you try to connect wilderness areas. So this is a huge pan-European green corridor network, where you try to connect the wilderness areas in Europe by creating wilderness bridges over highways, so that wildlife can migrate over the highway by simply putting highways underneath tunnels. It's a way of mitigating the impact of a highway, and then show that the project of the highway is still acceptable, even though there are some severe impacts on the connectivity of the wildlife. So if there are no questions, I will just continue talking and describing participation. Participation, I mentioned this also 2 days ago, is really important that you involve the public from the beginning in your project. I've put here an incentive of Landswerken as an example, where they provided a YouTube video. They published it online so that people can consult their way of seeing Kvammsvirkjun in southern Iceland. I mentioned this project before already, where we did the stakeholder analysis, and where you interact with the public and you encourage the public to discuss with the developer their concerns, that you can adapt the project in a way that it's more suitable. So feel free to look into the video maybe after class, just to see how Landswerken interacted with the public. Obviously, there are different ways of interacting with the public. You can have, for example, town hall meetings, like in the picture here, where you directly discuss with the public. You can have what you saw before, like online videos, like Landswerken did. And you can have also websites where you simply provide the data. But of course, you want to try to get the public, you want to try to get the information or the concerns of the public so that you can react to their concerns and try to come up with a joint solution with the public, because simply then your project will have more acceptance, social acceptance. And at the end, the environmental impact statement is all about getting a social acceptance for your project, because you don't want to avoid something where people go protest against your project and start complaining that well, you want to avoid pictures like here below, where everybody says that your project is a terrible project and it will destroy the nature and will be unsustainable. And obviously it's not always possible. Maybe some projects are simply not accepted by the public, and then it's up to the developer to decide if the developer still wants to push for it, or wants to say, look, instead of going into developing a project that is not accepted by the society, maybe they might think of some other project or something else. But the point I want to make with this, within the environmental impact assessment, also through the Aarhus Convention, legally the developer is required to inform the public. And this can be done in different ways, either websites, YouTube videos, or town hall meetings. And of course, the closer you interact with the public, the easier it is to find a consensus and address the concerns of the public. But of course, vice versa, you might run into some uncomfortable discussions, and you might have to address some very challenging aspects of your project if you interact very closely with the stakeholders, like in this town hall meeting visualized in the top picture. Yeah, so here, this is just a table again where you could, which kind of explains what I already tried to tell you before, that if you have, so for example, if you have presentation to small groups, well, this just shows, well, it's explained in the book, but in principle, it shows how different explanatory meetings, how they might impact the decision making. And the more you involve the stakeholders and the local population of your project, and you include them in the decision making, probably the higher your social acceptance will be. And so, yeah, I don't want to say too much about this. This is all explained in the book, but you just have simply different ways of interacting with the public about this. So this brings me to the end of the first part of the lecture. It's also already 11:10, and we have time for a short quiz and then a 10-minute break. Yangshu, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yes. So then we would have a short quiz. I would like you to go again, use your cell phones or use the web browser and go to menti.com, and we will have a short quiz about the first part of this lecture today. So please put in there the code 45660708, and then we can have a short quiz again, just like we did in past days. We have already 6 participants, 8 participants. People are signing up. Okay, so maybe we wait a little bit longer if someone else is going to come, but we have already 25 participants. Okay, and then we can go for a cup of coffee. Okay, so maybe Yangshu, we start with the first question. In the iPad model, what does P stand for? Production, profit, population, none of them. This was the model that we showed from the 1970s. It was probably the first model that really described environmental impact in a numeric way. We had it in one of the slides. Time is up, and we have, of course, it's population. It's population. There are 3 factors that make the impact, and population was the right, correct answer. And we have Santa Claus, Yola Swain is first with 966 points. Was fastest before Loco 3. And then we can go on to the second question. See if Santa Claus is going to be as fast again. And the second question is true or false? Measurements of magnitude and importance tend to be related, but do not necessarily directly correlate. Okay, this is a true or false question. So you have 50% chance of getting it right, even if you just guess. But of course, this is, okay, time's up. Yes. So we have, did something change? Yola Sven is conserving the lead with 980 points, 50 points ahead of Stefan. Loco 3 was behind, but we have Loco 2 in third place. Lots of Locos here, even Loco 4 today. So question 3 out of 5. I think I need a short break to get a coffee. Okay, what does T in the iPad model stand for? So we had P, which was already the population. A was the affluence, the economic output, and T was time, technology, tax. One of those 3. Or none of them. It could be also something else. So who got this correct? The correct answer is technology. So 10 got this correctly. So in principle, it's a very simple model where you have the population, the economic output, and the technology that are multiplied with each other. And I think we're going to have a new leader. Loco 2 was fastest and is the new leader before a mouse called 4566078 in second place, and a strawberry in third place called Earthman. So, okay, I think, is this the last question? No, 2 more questions. 2 more questions, then you can get a coffee. Which convention gives citizens the right to information? I think I mentioned this about 100 times at least. So can it be the Montreal Protocol? We mentioned it as well. Geneva Convention is also an important convention. Aarhus Convention and the Kyoto Protocol. Which one of the three? And of course, it is the Aarhus Convention, of course. The Geneva Convention is about human rights. Montreal Protocol is about the reduction of CFCs that destroy the ozone layer, and the Kyoto Protocol is a climate protocol where countries came together and agreed that greenhouse gases have to be reduced. But the Aarhus Convention provides citizens around the world the right to information. If someone builds a project, then they can go to court if they do not get if citizens are not provided with information about the project. Yola Sven took the lead again before Stefan and Pingu. Pingu came third, was fastest in this question. So very interesting. And Loco 2 is in second place. Loco 1 in Loco 2 is in fourth place, and Loco 1 in fifth place. So I think we have one last question of this first part of the lecture, and then we will have a short break. Which of the following can generate roadway noise? Okay, a bike, a car, a train, and all of them. Okay, I mean, one is for sure the highest impact. Train is not really on a road, and the bicycle might be pretty quiet. So yeah, okay. I mean, bike creates a little bit of noise. A train might be rather on a railway, so it might be a tricky question. But at least car was designated as the correct place answer, and Stefan was the fastest, and Stefan is the winner of this morning lecture. So again, this is more just to wake you all up. Congratulations to Stefan, and to start a discussion. And if you want, you can of course discuss now if a bicycle creates enough noise to be considered an environmental impact. Usually we go outside and we measure noise pollution. Unfortunately, this year we cannot do it, but I would be very surprised if you can actually measure with a noise meter the noise pollution from a bicycle. If it's a bicycle, it was written bike, so it could be a motorcycle. Then if it's a motorcycle, then of course it has a probably higher noise pollution than a car. But yeah, so it's a discussion worth, and in principle, what these quizzes should generate is a discussion on environmental impact. So let's make a short break. We will meet at 7 minutes and to have a short break, and then we continue with the second part of the lecture, which are 2 case studies. So let's meet in 10 minutes at 12:30, 11:30, I mean, Iceland time. Okay, everyone, we're gonna continue with the second part of today's lectures, and those are 2 case studies I would like to show you of environmental impact statements. So yeah, 1 second, I have to put up the slides. The slides are here. So 2 case studies I would like to discuss with you, or first present to you. And yeah, again, if you have questions, just feel free to post them into the chat of this Zoom lecture, of this Zoom meeting. One is the introduction of gasoline and diesel buses. And this was actually a post-decision monitoring. So at the end, so here you have again the entire environmental impact assessment process, where you, and in the first project I'm going to present, we already went through the entire process, and we were at the end because the company operating the buses, they came back to us and said, we need a post-decision monitoring of the environmental impact statement, where we would really like to see some of the concerns raised by some of the stakeholders, especially some of the politicians and some of the local residents, and where we had to go in and look into the post-decision monitoring of the introduction of biogas buses in the city of Bern in Switzerland. And the second project I want to present to you is a hydropower reservoir project, also located in Switzerland. And there we're going to look into the prediction of impacts. So this was in the middle of the environmental impact. Well, it was actually not directly in the middle of the environmental impact statement, but it was an outside project of such a prediction. And the companies were asked to make predictions, or the operator was asked to provide predictions into the future, how a hydropower reservoir impacts on downstream freshwater systems. So start out with the natural gas buses. This is actually a pretty interesting case study because it has also been discussed in Reykjavik City. As you probably know, biogas is produced by the waste company Sorpa, and could be used for driving methane buses. And this has been discussed in the past years if Strætó would shift away from diesel buses to use biogas buses. And I don't know exactly the newest decisions, but I think they decided to buy electric cars instead of biogas buses. But here I want to provide the example, the case study from the city of Bern. Bern is the capital city of Switzerland, 140,000 inhabitants. So comparable to Reykjavik City, maybe slightly bigger than just the municipality of Reykjavik. But if you include the agglomeration, it's almost 500,000 or 400,000. So it's including the surrounding suburbs. Bern is bigger than Reykjavik. Anyway, here you have an aerial picture of the city of Bern. And so what happened in 2006, the city of Bern decided to replace diesel buses with biogas buses. Biogas buses, they simply have a methane tank on top of the car, and it's in principle the same engine, but it simply runs on methane instead of diesel or gasoline. And what we were asked to do a post-monitoring of the environmental impact of those buses. And so at the beginning, we simply started out with an inventory. So this is what is expected from you until next Friday, where you go into the subchapters and you simply describe the project. So we simply describe the different buses. So they have that they bought. So these were the compressed natural gas buses. They have a capacity of 150 people. So those were the access buses, and the simple buses had a capacity of 100 people. They were both Euro 4 norm emission class, constructed in the year 2006 and 2007. And yeah, so some more units. The bigger one is of course a little bit more heavier, with 17 tons or almost 18 tons for the bigger bus, and the smaller bus with 12 tons, 12.5 tons for the smaller bus. The power engine is, the power of the motor is about the same, or 221 kilowatt, with 1,900 rounds per minute. So the service provided by the city, so they drive almost 5 million kilometers per year in 2006. In 2007, the service remained the same, but as you can see here, in 2006, all buses were diesel buses, and in 2007 the green part were replaced with methane buses or biogas buses, and this was where our post monitoring came into place, because before the city replaced further buses, they wanted to have a post-monitoring of the environmental impacts by looking into this replacement of some of the diesel buses with natural gas buses before replacing the fleet, the remaining fleet, or part of the remaining fleet with further natural gas or biogas buses. So what we did some map overlaying. So we described where the gas station is. In this particular case, the gas station was in the central city, which created some concerns from the residential areas around, because they were concerned that this natural gas is more explosive and that this could lead to an increased fire risk for the surrounding areas. So we assessed the fire risk by looking, and we also looked at the prevention measurements to mitigate the risk of the spreading of the methane. We looked at the security measures that were in place, and we described them, we simply described them without outlining that they all correspond to the regulations. We also described exactly how the number of buses were introduced. So here on the x-axis, you have the time axis. I'm sorry, this is all in German because the report was, of course, written in German, but the figures, I think they're pretty understandable. So you simply have here the number of buses that have been introduced. And so these are the solo buses, and these are the bendy buses, so the big one with 150 person capacity. And so we also described the cumulative service that the buses provide, how much kilometers they have been driving. So here you can see almost 1.4 million kilometers driven by the bending buses and almost 200,000 kilometers by the solo buses. And so what you can see here, the open spots, those were events where something happened to the natural gas buses that led to a temporal replacement of the natural gas buses with diesel buses because of some services. And this was actually of major concern to the operator, because they were concerned that maybe the natural gas buses are not as reliable as the diesel buses, which was an important aspect for the operator of the public buses. And we, of course, took a look into this as well. So we also provided a flow chart, especially for the concerns of the filling station, just to show that. So you have here the natural gas network where the natural gas comes in. There are valves, which so here's already the first security valve where you have a fire protection, and we simply described how the methane is being stored. Part of the methane has to be stored in a local reservoir so that you have enough methane to charge the natural gas buses within, well, they have to be charged within a very fast time. Because of logistic purposes, they had to be refilled within 20 minutes. So it was important that enough methane was locally stored to fill up the methane buses in a quick place. So it was an external company that assessed the risk, the fire risk, but in our report we simply provided the overview of how the situation is and referred to an external company that provided the fire risk of the installation. So what we did then, we did a scoping exercise where we tried to identify what are the main concerns of the citizens using the buses. And by far the biggest concern for the citizens was that they protect the environment and that they increase air quality in the cities. So this was very interesting for us, because then we could focus on the emissions of the bus. So I think our survey that we asked the the residents of Bern included something like over 50 questions. So we really went into the risk, we went into different aspects regarding the noise, but by far the biggest concern was the air quality, which was, of course, for us then a way to proceed with the with our report on the monitoring of the environmental impacts, where we put a special focus on the air quality and also on the protection of the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from the operation of the buses. Like mentioned before, a big concern was the liability of the buses and the number and type of perturbations. And so what we went into the company provided us with the statistics of the different perturbations that occurred and why sometimes natural gas buses weren't functioning as required. And then we analyzed how frequently are those problems related to natural gas, and how frequently is it simply because it's a new bus type that doesn't work. And when we analyzed, or when we took a closer look, frequently the perturbations were actually, the most frequent perturbations were not at all related to the natural gas. It was simply because it was a new bus, and the new bus had to be adjusted. So for example, here, the most frequent problem was that the doors didn't open and close correctly. So the bus was taken out of service. And so the original concern of some of the drivers and the operators of the public services could be eased by simply stating that these are technical issues that could occur with any new bus that you buy, and which was not related to the natural gas or the biogas that was being used in the buses. There were some problems that occurred due to the natural gas that was being used. So for example, the regulation of the motor and the system that provides the fuel to the motor, and the motor mechanic were most frequently causing problems. But most of these problems that occurred were under warranty. So this was a Volvo bus provided by Volvo, and Volvo took care of most of those problems. So they were also pretty quickly solved and could actually be, and so the operators could be convinced that in terms of operation, the natural gas or the biofuel was not really a hampering issue for the operation of the service, of the public service for the public transport. So also in our inventory, we included fuel consumption, energy value, density. So these are energy value, energy consumption, including the station. So this was an important aspect because some people were concerned that if you have a natural gas fueling station, that you require more energy because you need to compress the gas, and that this might impact significantly the energy consumption of the buses. So and then we looked at simply by doing an inventory, we looked at the CO2 emissions per kilogram fuel, and we could already there show that the natural gas buses, depending on a pure theoretical estimate, were slightly using less or were slightly providing less CO2 emissions per kilogram fuel produced. But this has to be considered carefully because they also use slightly more fuel than the diesel buses, like seen up here. So this has to be then assessed within a life cycle analysis, which I will get back to. So as seen from the scoping analysis by asking the residents, we found out that air quality was of a major concern for the citizens of Bern. And we also looked at the air quality in Bern regarding nitrogen dioxide, regarding fine particles like here PM10 and PM2.5. And regarding VOC emissions from the concentrations in the air. And you can see already here that this is actually a notoriously big problem in the city of Bern, where the legal value for nitrogen oxide and PM10 has been consistently over the legal limit of what is acceptable as an environmental impact. So the city is indeed, or the cities, or the government of the city is indeed forced to take measures to increase the air quality in the city, according to the monitoring of the air quality. It was a big, this was a big important point in the report, because this required, this made the argument true that you need to take actions to improve air quality within the city. So then we provided some tables where we simply describe the different emissions. So carbon dioxide has mostly an effect on greenhouse gases. Carbon monoxide can impact and harm humans. Nitrogen oxide, nitrogen dioxide is of course a pollutant that can also impact on human health. Then the carbon hydrogen emissions, those include those volatile organic components. They can be cancerogenic. We also listed them, and then of course the fine particles, and just gave a short statement, easily understandable for the general public, what impacts those air pollutants can have on the environment and on the residential residents of the city. So I know this is in German, but in principle it's simply a short table describing the impacts. So because the emissions were of major concern in regard to that air quality was frequently overpassing the legal standards. So what we did, we took two buses, a solo bus and a bending bus, into the lab, and we put them onto a emission standard test driving system, and we measured under lab conditions the CO2 emissions, the carbon monoxide emissions, nitrogen oxide emissions, the volatile organic components, or the carbon hydrogen emissions, and the fine particle emissions, and compare the same size bus, once a diesel bus and once a natural gas bus, and we could find out that at least for carbon dioxide, the natural gas bus was slightly higher. It's simply because it requires a little bit more fuel, has a per kilogram methane burned, the CO2 emissions a bit less, but in total, the methane or the natural gas bus emits slightly higher CO2 concentrations. Same for carbon monoxide, was also higher, but in regard of most of the other components, the natural gas bus was significantly lower, of order of magnitude, especially fine particles. Nitrogen oxides were a lot lower, and nitrogen oxides were also a lot lower. So we did then some measurements of noise, where we simply went out with a noise meter. We measured the noise produced by a diesel bus going by a natural gas bus go by at different distances from the road and at different heights. And we could actually see that the noise emissions from from the gas buses and from the diesel buses were not significantly different. Unfortunately, this figure, I don't have the uncertainty within it, but if I remember correctly, it was about 10% uncertainty. Simply, if you measure 3 or 4 times, or if you measure several times, there's a certain variability, which is due to the uncertainty of the measurement. So, and since the variability of the measurements is higher, about 10%, then the difference seen here, there's no significant difference between diesel and gas buses, at least in the experiment we made. Actually, to be honest, it's more the condition of the road. If you have a wet road, it's a lot noisier than if you have a dry road. And of course, if you have some trees or some vegetation next to the road, the reduction of the noise level is a lot more reduced than the difference seen here. So, but the next question was that these buses were not supposed to run on only on natural gas, but on biogas produced in the local sewage treatment plant. And this required a life cycle assessment because we needed to know how much energy and how much, what is the total environmental impact of operating a sewage treatment plant, producing methane from the sewage, putting the methane into the natural gas system, and then providing it to the buses and then drive the bus. What is the total environmental impact, and how does this compare to the production of diesel as fuel, and then the consumption of fuel, and then the total impact, and then to assess the total impacts, environmental impacts of a diesel bus. So this required a life cycle analysis. Like I mentioned before, we had to do a system boundary because we could not take everything into account. We limited ourselves to, well, in the case of the diesel buses, we limited us to the production of the diesel, to the electricity production, to run the fuel station of the diesel, and then to the operation of the diesel, of the bus. But we did not take into account the production of the bus and the recommissioning of the bus, of the diesel bus. A natural gas, of course, the system boundary was similar, had to be similar in order that it's comparable. So the production of the natural gas was taken into account, the electricity was taken into account to run the gas station, and then the operation of the buses, of the natural gas buses, was taken into account. And then for the specific case of biogas production, if you produce the methane in a sewage treatment plant based on biomass, then we had to take into account that you have to operate a sewage treatment plant. In this particular case, we argued that the sewage treatment plant is run anyway, because by Swiss legislation, you have to treat all sewage water, all wastewater in a sewage treatment plant before you can release it into the river. So in our system boundary, the operation of the sewage treatment plant was excluded of the system boundary for running biogas buses. However, the operation of the biogas reactor within the sewage treatment plant was included in the system boundary. What was also included is the additional supply of biomass. There had to be some products had to be added to the biogas reactor. So those were waste, food waste and slaughterhouse waste that was added to the biogas reactor, or at least some biomass was added to the biogas reactor in order to provide sufficient, in order to be able to produce sufficient biogas to run the entire gas fleet of the city services. This is an important aspect. It was also important that only bio-waste was added to the biogas reactor. So there were no crops grown and add it to the biogas reactor, because this would, of course, then impact severely the life cycle analysis. But otherwise, the system boundary was pretty similar. Electricity was, of course, the Swiss mix. Then you had to run you had to clean the gas because it has to have a standard in order to use it in the buses of 97% methane. And then you had to run the filling station, and then also the operation of the buses. Finally, we also compared the three types of buses with a life cycle analysis of electric buses, trolley buses, where the buses use direct electricity from the Swiss grid. And we made the flow chart. I showed this also in the slides before, or yesterday at least, before yesterday, how the material flows with, where the material comes from and how it goes into the sewage treatment plant. So you have the operation of the sewage that comes into the sewage treatment plant. There's additional biomass coming into the biogas reactor from different from the surrounding agricultural farmsteads and from the food waste. And of course, there's some electricity that went into the biogas reactor as well from the sewage treatment plant. In total, about 40 million kilowatt hour biogas was produced, went into the biogas reactor. And okay, and part of it went back into the operation of the sewage treatment plant, while about 13 million kilowatt hours biogas was provided to the city services. So this corresponds to about 1,000 tons of natural gas that were needed to run the entire fleet of public transport buses in the city of Bern. So again, just to show that we created the energy flow chart to provide the reader an overview of where does the energy come from, where do the substrates come. So a typical example of a flow chart that you might also include in your final report. Then we used EcoInvent. I mentioned this just before. EcoInvent is a database where you can go in and say, okay, we would like to know the environmental impacts of 1 kilogram of diesel. This was very convenient. So it was very easy for us to do the life cycle analysis for the diesel buses and for the electric buses and for the natural gas buses. It was a bit more complicated for the specific case of biogas buses because we had this sewage treatment plant. So there we had to find out, we had to go into EcoInvent and look for the specific products that are needed to build a biogas reactor next to a sewage treatment plant and to account the entire environmental impacts that are associated with the production of biogas next to a sewage treatment plant. So I'm going to cut this short because the results, once you put the numbers together in you can use Gabi or you can use CIMA Pro or OpenLCA. There are different softwares that you can use for this, and they are available. And also Reykjavik University has access to some of the software, and we're currently already still deciding which software we're going to acquire, but this is in process. So, but using those softwares, you can come up with the total CO2 emission footprint for natural gas buses, for biogas buses, for diesel buses, and for trolley buses, electric buses. And you can also split it up into what emissions are created during the operation of the gas station, for the cleaning of the biogas, during the production of the fuel, and due to the inclusion of different biomasses. And you can see here already natural gas. If it's fossil natural gas that is extracted from the ground, it might come from Siberia or through a pipeline that comes all the way from Siberia, or being produced also in some of the natural gas fields in Eastern Europe. Then, of course, you have the CO2 emissions that fully have to be accounted into the operation of the bus. And then the natural gas bus has a pretty high CO2 footprint, which is almost 1.7 tons or kilograms per kilometer. The biogas bus has in principle the same CO2 emission because it's the same gas, but because for the production of the biomass, you assimilate the same amount of CO2. So this is why you could argue that the biogas buses run carbon neutral. In order to produce the organic material that is then comes into the sewage treatment plant, the same amount of CO2 is extracted out of the atmosphere by simply growing plants and producing food that is then eaten by humans, and then goes into the sewage treatment plant. So it's a cycle. So the biogas does not have any CO2 emissions during the operation of the bus. And of course, then the CO2 footprint of a biogas bus is significantly lower. This would be the same for Reykjavik City. If Reykjavik City were to run on biogas from Sorpa, because it's methane produced from a waste stream, the CO2, and from biomass, it can be considered that it's carbon neutral, and you could argue that only the CO2 footprint from the cleaning of the gas and the operation of the filling station can be attributed to the operation of the bus. Diesel buses, of course, they run on fossil fuel. They have a carbon footprint, which is slightly lower than the one from natural gas buses. And of course, you add then also the production of the fuel, similar to the natural gas buses. Trolley buses, they run on electricity. So in principle, it's just a Swiss electric mix. Swiss electricity is composed out of about 60% hydropower, 50% hydropower, maybe 40% nuclear power, and then there's a little bit of renewable energy from different sources, photovoltaics, wind, and there's also a little bit of fossil thermal power plants, but mostly nuclear and mostly hydropower. So both have a relatively low carbon footprint. So that is why a trolleybus runs on a pretty low carbon footprint in Switzerland. Same would be true, of course, in Iceland, where you have a 100% renewable electricity mix with a very low carbon footprint. But you saw that the buses also create other emissions like nitrogen oxides and volatile organic components. So you can include this in EcoInvent and come up with total environmental impact points, and then you can compare it. And then the natural gas bus, because it has a lot less nitrogen oxide emissions, has a significantly lower impact than the diesel buses. So this is the difference between the environmental impact or the ecological footprint and the carbon footprint. So in the carbon footprint, the natural gas bus is slightly higher than the diesel bus, but in the total ecological impact, the natural gas bus is still cleaner simply because the emissions are less toxic and include less cancerogenic components and create less smog, and accordingly, it's a cleaner process. It's also methane CH4. If you burn it, the burning process is simply cleaner than if you burn diesel in a combustion engine. But compared to the other two buses, biogas buses are still have even lower environmental impact because, of course, there's no CO2 emissions. And biogas buses and trolley buses are almost the same in regard to the total environmental impact buses. This was an important statement because this really showed that the biogas buses are significantly cleaner than the diesel buses, and that even if biogas is not used and you have to use natural gas, you still have a lot better environmental impact than if you were to use diesel buses in the city center. We also looked at the financial aspects, just to point it out, just to be transparent. We provided an analysis how the whole system is working, because of course there were some connections between the city-run city services, between the power companies that provide the biogas, between the sewage treatment plant. So we provided, at least what was available to us, a description of how the different companies are interconnected to be fully transparent regarding the energy consumption. So finally, the conclusion were that our conclusions were that the natural gas buses or the biogas buses are a lot cleaner, a lot environmentally friendlier. They are just as reliable as diesel buses. And since then, if I'm not mistaken, the city of Bern has biogas buses that run mostly on, or natural gas buses that run mostly on biogas from the local sewage treatment plant with a biogas reactor. And of course, they made out of it also a public statement by painting them in green and giving them and pointing out that it is biogas and promoting them among the residents of the city of Bern. So any questions so far to the first case study?
Yes, I actually have a question.
Yes.
When you were talking about, or sort of a simulation, if you do an life cycle assessment, is it okay to assume that, I've heard the term carbon or climate relevant CO2 emissions. So is it okay to assume, for example, if you do something with food, that if the plant assimilates carbon dioxide and then in the end of the life cycle, it releases it back. So can you assume then that it's carbon neutral, or do you have to go in and prove how much it captures carbon? Because the carbon in the carbon dioxide isn't originated from fossil fuels.
Yeah, so there's a difference in a life cycle analysis. You make a difference if the original CO2 is fossil-based or if it's organic-based. That is already the first distinction you make in a life cycle analysis. In the case of any biofuel, it's organic-based. So you already define it as something that is circular, because as soon as you have a biomass, it assimilates the CO2 from the atmosphere. So it's a circular system. Where it becomes a bit tricky is because if you have bio-waste and you just would throw it put it into a landfill, which is in the European Union, I'm not exactly sure. I think it's prohibited, or at least there's a directive that this should be prevented. Then you would create methane, and then methane has a lot higher greenhouse potential, and so that is why nowadays in the European Union, I think the directive is that you should flare it off. You should capture it and at least flare it, and that would be the normal cycle. So then it would be a CO2 normal cycle. But if on top of it you would use it for like in the case of methane buses, or for heating purposes, or for cooking purposes, or for whatever, or produce electricity, then I think you can, in the carbon accounting, even count it twice in some cases, because it's made out of waste. Because you actually reduce a potentially a lot harmfuler greenhouse gas like methane, and which would normally have to be flared off by reusing it for a service that would normally be provided through a fossil driven or fossil powered energy source. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much. But just to make sure, so it's like basically common knowledge. You don't have to have research paper or anything. That if you can prove that it's organic based carbon dioxide, then you can count it as neutral.
Yes. So this goes a little bit into the legislation. I have not. We have been discussing this for at least when I was working on those topics. How to allocate CO2 emissions is an increasingly complex process and includes also some political aspects. For example, you could argue that the sewage treatment plant produces CO2, and the processing and if you have a sewage treatment plant that produces methane, in principle, you could argue that some of the CO2 should be allocated to the methane production as well. This is the case for any multi-purpose plant. So the allocation of the total CO2 emissions becomes a little bit a political discussion. What service do you want to attribute more CO2? But from a pure scientific point of view, this is solved by simply doing two life cycle assessments, where you do one, where you just differentiate between organic CO2 and fossil CO2, and then yeah, there are various different questions. I hope I answered your questions that are associated with this.
Yes, thank you.
Maybe we can go into more details on Monday when we look at the LCA, when we look at specific cases of LCA life cycle analysis.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, thank you. So, oh, okay. I think if there are no further questions, I'm going to continue with the second case study. And the second case study is about a hydropower reservoir. And there we're in the prediction of the impacts. So we're in the more or less in the middle of the environmental impact assessment, if you were to relate it to the assessment. And again, I would just want to show you that sometimes these studies are pretty extensive studies, but they cover just a small part of an environmental impact assessment process. And in this second case study, it's about a hydropower plant that was built in the Alps of Switzerland, and that had an impact on the downstream water flowing. So it's here here's a picture of central Switzerland. This is Interlaken, and you have the Lake of Brienz in the back and the Lake of Thun in the front. And you can see already there's a slight difference in the color of the two lakes. The Lake Brienz is frequently a bit grayish and milkish, almost white grayish. I don't know if you see it on this picture very well. While Lake of Thun, which is just downstream, is a perfectly beautiful mountain lake with a deep blue color, like you would expect it. Mm-hmm. So here's the picture of the hydropower plant that I was looking into, and it's in specifically. So this is just upstream of Lake Brienz. If you go up into the mountains, into the high Alps of the Bernese Oberland, and then you have here the different hydropower reservoirs where the water is being stored. It's being pumped up during nighttime and released during daytime when energy prices are high, to optimize the energy production. And so yeah, it's a really complex hydropower system where the water is being pumped up and down and released, and to optimize it, to optimize energy production when energy needs are highest. In total, this has a energy production of 600 gigawatt hours per year, and a capacity of 300 48 megawatts. So this is almost a small nuclear power plant that you can replace with a hydropower system like this. And just to point out, so the mountains are 4,200 meters high here. So the altitude difference between the turbines and the reservoir is also quite high. So this is why you reach this high capacity of almost comparable to almost the nuclear power plant, simply by the high altitude difference between the reservoirs and the turbines. So long story, but the actual project that the hydropower company want to do, they wanted to increase the Grimselstaumauer, so it's this wall here, this storage here, by 23 meters. So what would happen, you would store up by 23 meters the lake at the higher level, and you would increase the pump storage between the lower reservoir and the upper reservoir by having more volume to work with. And the main purpose of this is to increase the pump storage so that you can pump up more water during nighttime when energy prices are low and there's the consumption is low, and release more energy, produce more energy during daytime when energy demand is higher and you want to produce more electricity. So it's in principle a simple way of storing energy by pumping up and down water. And this can be increased by increasing the volume by and increasing the dam, the hydropower dam, by 23 meters and increasing the volume. And this would look like this. So they presented this to the stakeholders as a first case studies. They made a nice picture here and presented it as something that is really sustainable with the tourist information here and so on. And here's a picture of it. So here you have the hydropower system with in total 7 reservoirs that were built, and the Grimsel reservoir would have been increased by 23 meters through this project. On the so Lake Brienz, the lake I showed before with this slightly grayish color, has 2 rivers coming in. One is the river that comes in from the hydropower plant, and the other one is a river that is completely uninfluenced. There's no hydropower going on there. And so here, so here's the picture of the hydropower dam, where you see this grayish color that comes from the hydropower plants and flows into the lake. So background story through the scoping. This was done before. One of the main concerns of the residents was the impact on fishing yields. And the reason was that these Brienzling is a local speciality that had a cultural value for the people, and that also economic value for the people living in the area, and that they were most concerned about. So this was the main target that we were concerned about regarding the environmental impact of increasing the storage volume of the reservoir. Keep in mind that the project is about a 10 billion euro project. So if you spend 100,000 or maybe a couple of 100,000 euros to project the impact, it's maybe well spent money, because then you can reduce the cost for the entire project, which is of course a lot higher. But here's the background information. This is the figure I always show with this baseline argument. And what I also want to show here, so in 1932, the first hydropower plant was constructed. In 1935, the other 7 reservoirs were built in 1953. And now the company planned to increase by 23 meters the hydropower reservoir. You can see here the fishing yields, they actually increased up until the 70s. And since the 70s, they have been declining. And of course, maybe it's also a generation shift, but the the Noor fishermen, they were all complaining since the 70s that fishing yields are dropping and that something is happening to the river, and they were finger pointing to the hydropower reservoirs upstream. And of course, if you live down at Lake Brienz, you can see that the hydropower reservoir releases pretty turbid water into the lake. And just downstream, you have Lake Thun, which is perfectly blue, while Lake Brienz has continuously is including this very turbid glacial water that comes directly from the hydropower reservoirs, which are upstream. And you can see this also at the confluence of the release of the hydropower plant, where the water from the reservoirs is being released from the turbines into the residual flow of the river. And you can see that the residual flow of the river is a perfectly clean mountain stream, while the water that is coming from the turbines is a very turbid, milkyish gray, has a very milkyish gray color. So anyone who would just walk there would immediately finger point towards the turbines and say, this turbid water is an environmental impact that is pretty significant. But the background of this turbid glacial water is a very natural one, because here's the glacier snout. This is the Oberrohr Glacier up upstream of the big hydropower reservoirs. You can see it's gravel covered. So in principle, underneath those gravel stones is pure ice. And what happens over many decades, the gravel is grinded to small colloids of granite, which are then transported in the river into the reservoirs. So long story to short statement, what we went in a research project that lasted actually 4 years, we assessed the sediment transport that comes from the glacier and flows down into the streams, and we could assess that almost half a million tons of particles are being transported in the rivers downstream into the reservoirs and finally into Lake Brienz. So we looked at the turbidity in the lake. So this is a cross section of Lake Brienz, the lake where the fishermen are concerned about that turbid water impacts on fishing yields. And we assessed the situation for winter and summer, and we found out that in wintertime, the lake clears up, but it's still pretty turbid, that usually turbidity stays above 1.4 milligrams milligrams per liter or grams per cubic meter of water. But in summertime, turbidity increases significantly to almost, I can't see the scale here, to almost 15 milligrams per liter at the surface. While the lower water, the deep water, stays at least on the RA side, this is the side where the hydropower water comes in, stays pretty clean. So again, the RA river is the river that brings in turbidity through the hydropower plant. And you can see in wintertime, actually the RA brings in a lot of turbid water. And this was already a first indication, because Lütschinen has also a lot of glacier and brings in also a lot of turbidity. But the RA brings in turbidity during wintertime, while the Lütschinen, which doesn't have hydropower, is mostly frozen water, and nothing comes during wintertime. So the main point that we could assess with models and by looking at the turbidity flows in the river and in the lake is that through the operation of hydropower during wintertime, turbid water was brought into the lake during wintertime, which under natural conditions would not happen, because simply under natural conditions without hydropower, everything would be frozen and the water would stay in the mountains as snow and ice. Also, what was interesting to see is that during summertime, the river, which didn't have hydropower, brought in a lot of turbid water into the deep water, while the river that brought in turbid water from hydropower brought in all the water into the surface layer of the lake, and it didn't plunge down to the deep water. And this is mostly due to the fact that the concentration of sediment in the river affected by hydropower is always around 50 milligrams per liter. And then the water, when it flows into the lake, flows into the surface, while the Luchinen, the river that doesn't have hydropower, brings mostly turbid water during heavy precipitation event. And then the concentration is so high that the water becomes reaches a high density and plunges down into the deep water and settles down to the bottom of the lake. So we could identify some effects of hydropower on the turbidity of the lake, which could potentially impact on the phytoplankton, the production of algae, and finally zooplankton, and finally affect the whole food chain up to the fish that finally affect the fishing yields. But we still wanted to predict it for a situation if you increase the power plant, the hydropower reservoir by 23 meters. So what we did then, we used the numerical model, and we simply ran the situation for today, for the situation without hydropower, and then ran also the situation in the future if you increase the volume of the reservoir by 23 meters. And so this is the interesting point. So if we compare the situation without hydropower with the situation with hydropower, we could identify that you can see here that dotted lines is always without hydropower, and the solid line is always the present situation with hydropower. We could see that during summertime, so this is a typical year, during summertime, turbidity decreased and light attenuation decreased due to the construction of hydropower plants, because simply some of the sediment is being held back in the reservoirs. However, during wintertime, the hydropower reservoir increased the turbidity and increased also the light attenuation during wintertime. So what you have here is a shift of light availability in the lake, which also impacts on phytoplankton, zooplankton, and finally fishing yields. So we then use the biochemical model to simulate the impacts of changing light availability in the lake on algae production, on zooplankton, and finally on the fish. And we ran it through the model. I'm going to cut this short because if you're interested, feel free to read this all up. This is all very explained in our publication. But we could assess the concentration of zooplankton in the lake if during the situation before the construction of the hydropower plant, in the situation today, and during the 1970s when fishing yields were pretty high. And this was actually the springing point, that during the 70s or up until the 1980s, phosphorus concentrations were almost twice as high as today, simply because at that point sewage treatment plants were not yet in place, and accordingly zooplankton concentrations were expected are expected to be twice as high as today. So the fishing yields were higher in the 1970s simply because there was more nutrient available, more zooplankton, more phytoplankton, more zooplankton, and which leads to more fish. Without hydropower plants and without this additional phosphorus from sewage, the situation would actually be pretty much leveled out over the year. And this is actually the springing point where fishermen's, which is still a political issue. But as you can see here, the red line corresponds to the actual baseline condition for the lake. And you can see that during wintertime, under the baseline condition before the construction of hydropower, zooplankton concentrations were higher, while during summertime, zooplankton concentrations were lower than today. And this led us to this statement that in principle, the main cause for declining fishing yields is of course the reduction of phosphorus in the inflow of the lake. But there is this dynamic shift, temporal shift of zooplankton concentrations, and the March and April, this is what comes from the fishermen again, when you do a scoping survey, that this is a critical area for the young fish to grow, and that in March, April, they have to find the zooplankton and grow bigger in order that they become big enough so that they can be caught during summertime. So we could ease some of the concerns of the fishermen, but we had to, based on these simulations, we had to confirm partial concerns of the fishermen that there might be an impact of hydropower on fishing yields in the area. But also, based on this, we could come up with mitigation measures by simply suggesting release of young fish into the lake at an earlier point in the year, and trying to adjust the operation of hydropower to mitigate this impact. So the main point I want to make with this is that these simulations were helpful to mitigate the impacts of hydropower on fishing yields, and also to ease the tension and identify the real cause or part of the cause for the declining fishing yields by simply pointing out that phosphorus concentrations were that the reduction of phosphorus concentrations were an overlaying effect of impacts on fishing yields. But here, still the questions were not answered. What would happen if you increase the reservoir by 23 meters? And we did this, of course, by using our model, and we plugged the situation into our numerical model and looked at it. What would happen if you have 75 million cubic meters of more storage? And of course, most of the water would be shifted from the summertime to wintertime. More water would be released during wintertime, and this would increase the effect that we showed before, that hydropower has an effect on the temporal shift of the turbidity in the lake and on the algae production in the lake by simply releasing more turbid water during the winter times than during the summer times. And this was, again, an important statement in the environmental impact statement in the environmental impact projection for the new hydropower project. And we then compared this to the natural variability of turbidity in the lake. And we compared the years 1999 to 2005. And we could find out that due to natural variability, simply because sometimes you have a year where you have a lot of rainfall and a lot of erosion and a lot of turbidity that comes into the lake, turbidity can vary by 40%. And this can impact algae production also by 40%. So this comes all out of these simulations for the variability over different years. And we could show that the relative change due to the increase of storage volume is maybe 7% during winter time and maybe 3% during summer times, which we argued is less than these 40% change due to temporal conditions during specific years. And this led us to the argument that these environmental impacts, there is an environmental impact, but the significance is less than the annual variability of the turbidity. And this is why we argued that the hydropower plant has an impact, but the importance is not significant enough to seriously jeopardize the fishing yields as argued before. So this leads me, this is more or less what I wanted to show you regarding those two case studies. Again, I just wanted to show you how complex sometimes environmental impact assessments are and how much in detail you have to go to provide a full assessment. And a full environmental impact assessment frequently lasts over many years. So obviously we try just to mimic within the 3 weeks we have within your report, the environmental impact statement. And, but still, I would like you to get involved and with the essence of an environmental impact statement within this course. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask now. Anyone? Otherwise, if there are no questions, I don't see any questions. No, there are no questions. Then I think we have a quiz again, a short quiz on the case studies. Yangshu, can you start the quiz? Then we would do the short quiz on the case studies. And start with the quiz. So yeah, so please go again to menti.com, type in the code 1296895, and as soon as we have reasonable all the participants, we would start with the quiz again about the two case studies. And so there are 6 questions. We have 18 participants. We're still going to wait a bit till everybody can sign in. We have 30, in total we have 32 or 31 participants today, so we might reach 30 participants in the quiz. Okay, let's wait maybe more 15 more seconds, and then we can start with the first question. So please, if you're still would like to join, please join now, and then we would start with the quiz. Okay, Young, I think we can start with the quiz and go ahead. So first question, which kind of bus causes the most CO2 emission? Natural gas bus, biogas bus, diesel bus, or trolley bus? So this is the carbon footprint. Which of the 4 buses had the highest carbon footprint when driving? This came out of the LCA analysis. It was actually the natural gas bus. If you look at it, if you remember the slide, natural gas has a slightly higher consumption. So that is why the carbon footprint of the natural gas bus is higher. But biogas is of course a lot better because the biogas is carbon neutral. So there's a difference between natural gas and biogas. But Montana with American football is, as an icon, takes the lead. And we have a new leaderboard. Montana and Homer with a donut is on 2nd position, and Vish, the mouse Vish is in 3rd position, and Chloe in 4th position. Only 4 people got this right. Question 2 is the second question. Which kind of bus causes the least CO2 emission? Okay, so is natural gas, biogas, diesel, or trolley? So this time the least CO2, which bus has the least carbon footprint? And of course it's the biogas bus, because the same amount of CO2 is recycled in order to produce the biomass. So that is why driving the biogas bus doesn't create any CO2 emissions. I think we have a new leader. Homer with a donut as an icon is the new leader. Is 2nd place Jess with a little crab, and then Niklaus South Nicholas is coming soon to town, and local in 4th position. Okay, then question 3. Which kind of bus has the least environmental impact points, or the lowest ecological footprint? Natural gas bus, biogas bus, diesel bus, or trolley bus. This was a pretty evident result we got out of it, and of course it was the biogas bus, because the biogas bus has a very low carbon footprint and also produces less
It's the trolley.
toxic. Oh yes, it was the trolley, true. Yes, because it was electric bus. Sorry, I was completely, I forgot about the trolley bus. But the trolley bus is environmentally friendlier in total than the biogas bus. It's true. Sorry about this, I was already in the coffee break. So this took the position. This was a bit quick. We could not see the leaderboard, but that's okay. We'll just go straight to question 4. Which of the following are environmental impacts due to hydropower infrastructure? Changes of algae production in downstream waters, increased methane emission, distribution of fish mitigation, and spawning grounds. Okay, so I did not address everything in the case studies, but if you listen carefully during the previous days, then you might get this correct anyway. There are several impacts. Yeah, it's all of them. So of course, like shown in the case study, the change of the algae production is an impact because of the turbidity that changes the light availability. But methane production, if you create new flooded areas, you can create methane in the new lakes that are being created, and this can be an emission. And of course, hydropower reservoir or dam is always an obstacle where fish have to migrate upstream, have to contour. So you would have to build a fish ladder in order to mitigate that migration of fish obstacle or the reduction of migration of fish. So all of them are environmental impacts. This is first, then we have a vote goat in 2nd place, and so on. Question 5. Question 5. What is the dam's impact on the surface water layer during winter time? So this was the very, this involves the dynamic shift of turbidity, increased particle concentration, increased light attenuation. So during winter time, increased particle concentration, decreased light attenuation, decreased particle concentration, increased light attenuation, decreased particle concentration, decreased light attenuation. And this was, of course, time's up. It was, of course, increased particle concentration and increased light attenuation. If you increase the particle concentration, you have less water, less light that can penetrate into the water. So you increase also the light attenuation. It was maybe a tricky question because there were so many, you had to read very carefully, but the first answer was the correct one. Also, this was during winter time, because during winter time, a lot of turbid water is released from the hydropower reservoir. We have a new leader. Niklaus was the fastest this time, ahead with only 29 points ahead of Jess. And then Vote Goat is in 3rd position, and in 4th position is a smiley cat with a double S. And so last question for today. We'll see who is going to be. What is the dam's impact on the surface water layer during summertime? This time during summertime, increased particle concentration, increased light attenuation, increased particle concentration, decreased light attenuation, decreased particle concentration, increased light attenuation, decreased particle concentration, decreased light attenuation. So you have to read very carefully. During summertime, A lot of the turbidity is held back in the reservoir. So of course it is decreased particle concentration, and this also decreases the light attenuation. So in principle, due to the hydropower operation during summertime, the lake becomes less turbid and increases the decreases the light attenuation, increases the phytoplankton. And we have a winner. Niklaus is the winner. Congratulations to Niklaus with 3,602 points. He preserved his lead. And so this is the final survey. It's almost 1 o'clock. In principle, this is the end. I'm going to make a short break, 5 minutes. And those of you who have questions, in principle, yeah, this is all I wanted to show. There are some slides at the end of the that I still have in there. The slides are more for you to inspire you how you could structure your project into different spheres. I'm going to show them very quickly to you. So these are the components. So when you go in and and tomorrow present your team, one way of structuring and allocating tasks to each team member is by simply saying, okay, someone is going to look at the lithosphere, someone at the hydrosphere, atmosphere, biosphere, and anthroposphere. But these are really, it's very case specific depending on your project, what you're going to be looking at. So feel free to structure it the way you want. If you have questions, we can discuss it. I'll still be online after, but the official part of the lecture is going to finish here. But we can have still discussions regarding your projects, regarding the structuring of the project. And also, if someone still is looking for a group, or if someone is still looking for members in their group, please write now into the chat of this Zoom meeting so that we can allocate people who are still looking for a group to groups that are still looking for members. Or write me a mail and I can also try to connect you to people that are still looking for a group to join. Is there anyone who is still looking for a group or who is looking for a member for their group? So there's someone in the chat. I'm not in the group. I think it should be really a group work. If you work alone, unless you have a really easy project, I would prefer if you could join another group, unless you have really a project that you really would like to work by yourself. I think it's also important to get experience in working together, because an environmental impact assessment, usually you will do it as a team. You will have to discuss the issues with the team, so it's part of the learning process. But okay, so but we can discuss it. If someone really would like to work on a specific project by themselves, it's possible, but I encourage you to do it as a teamwork. So there's Louis writes that there's still 2 spaces in the team. So on a wind farm in Northeast Iceland, I think it's a very interesting project. We had projects about wind farms before, so feel free to contact Louis if you would like to work on a wind farm and you're still looking for a group. Otherwise, are there people in the waiting room? Okay, is there anyone else who is still looking for a group? Okay, if not, then I would end the official lecture for today. And we would meet tomorrow at 10 o'clock Iceland time for the project topic presentation. So again, like I wrote yesterday in the email, I would expect you to prepare maybe a 15-minute presentation, present your team members, present how the team members are divided up into different topics, and present maybe the way the methods you would like to use to address your environmental impact project, and also maybe address some of the expected results. Keep in mind this is kind of the presentation tomorrow should mimic the interaction with the public. So if you get critical feedback from your classmates after tomorrow's presentation, you could see this a bit as this process of interacting with the public, and then you would have to make a special effort to address the concerns that are addressed in the presentation tomorrow. So the more you put in there into the presentation, the more feedback you get, the better you can prepare your final presentation for something that is acceptable for the public. And of course, tomorrow's presentation is also a way of finding synergies. I'm trying to I will try to give you my advice, where to get information. So the better you outline the methods, the better I can try to give you feedback, or some other classmates can give you feedback on what you're looking for. I leave it up to you. I think it can be helpful if you designate one presenter that presents the whole project. But if you feel like that you would rather have everybody give a part of the presentation, then you can also do this. You might want to test a bit the technology so that everybody knows how to share the screen, because you will have to share the screen. And if you don't sit in the same room, you might really want to test this before, so we don't lose too much time in testing, sharing screen and shifting between presenters. But in principle, if we were to do this in class, we would, of course, I would like to see everyone present part of it, but since we are doing it online, I can understand that it might be easier if one person does the entire presentation. So please, perhaps test the screen sharing if everything works, or maybe have one presentation for all presenters, and then simply shift the microphone over to the next presenter if you have the whole group presenting the project. Okay, any further questions?
Yeah, I have one question.
Yes.
You quite often mention that a good way to sort of do the project in different phases, that you concentrate on the different spheres, but can you also do so that if you use different assessment tools, so that someone does like the life cycle assessment, someone does a survey, someone does the socioeconomic impacts?
Yes, that's a very good question, because it really, so it's up to you to decide how you structure your project, because every project is different. And during the scoping, you probably have identified which impacts require more investigations. And those should, of course, have a higher weight. If you have a project where the social interaction and social acceptance is a lot more important than the biosphere and the hydrosphere and the lithosphere, then it doesn't make sense to have a huge chapter about each of the spheres. So it's really topic dependent how you divide your project. So if you have one person that does a survey, another person that does a economic impact, economic feasibility study, another person looks at the social acceptance, it's fine with me. I think at the end, of course, I think at the end you should, the purpose is, of course, that everybody gets involved and that you adhere to the, maybe the spirit of an environmental impact statement. I'm aware that it's impossible to do a full environmental impact statement for within the 3 weeks you have, but for me it's important that you adhere, that you somehow use of some of the tools that we've discussed during the last 3 days, that you have sub-chapters where different people work on sub-chapters and that you merge it into a final product. And at the end, I think it would be good if you have a convincing environmental impact statement about your topic. So whatever you're looking into, with the tools that you presented and the topics that you covered, try to be convincing that your project is environmentally or is sustainable, might have some environmental impacts, but the benefits for the society outweigh the environmental impacts. But
right,
here,
thank you.
Yep. So the remaining slides I have in the slides, if you go to the Dropbox, they are more a suggestion how you could structure your project into the different spheres. But feel free to divide it up the way it fits best to your project. I think this is more or less everything. If there are no further questions, I will be available if you just write me a mail and I'll try to answer. Otherwise, we will meet tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock Iceland time. And yes, I think if there are no further questions, we would close the Zoom meeting and meet again tomorrow morning. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a nice day, have a nice afternoon. Looking forward to your presentations tomorrow. Bye-bye.